All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming in, stopping by. We're going to go ahead and get started and got a kind of nice small little group here today. So Dylan had the good idea to do some introductions, so I can go ahead and start off. I'm Talon Muse. I'm a water and cropping systems educator. I cover Dawson, Buffalo, and Custer counties. And so we're kind of doing something new. We're going to try to do this online. I don't know if you guys saw that as part of the poster and those kinds of things. So we're online and it's also streaming to YouTube. So we've got a new account for the Scout Nebraska, which hopefully you have maybe seen before. If not, that's how we're doing kind of like pest monitoring, kind of doing some management updates throughout the season in the field. And we do like a live stream at 11 a.m. on Fridays every day where one of us educators around the state, currently it's kind of been most representative of me and Dylan and another educator, but hopefully we kind of can grow the program a little bit. That way we're getting updates from all around the state throughout the year. And so, yes, thank you very much. I'll let maybe Eric introduce himself and we can go.
Sure. Eric Hunt, I'm the statewide educator for agricultural meteorology and climate resilience with the University of Nebraska for a little over 3 years.
Tamara Jackson Zims. I'm the Nebraska Extension corn pathologist for Nebraska, and I have statewide responsibility.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dylan Mangel. I'm the soybean pathologist in Nebraska. I'm Terry Beans from Lexington. I farm, do a little crop adjustment. I'm Marcos Perez. I'm the Gowan USA sales representative, and I cover Eastern Nebraska and Eastern Kansas.
Bruce Carnetz, I'm the executive director at the Nebraska Independent Crop Consultant Association.
I'm Haley Groth. I'm a crop protection territory manager for Corteva Agri-Science. I live here in town and I cover 12 counties in South Central Nebraska.
I'm Trevor Staff. I also live in Kearney. Work for Corteva covering geography one. Cole Peters. I work for Corteva. I cover Western Nebraska. And thank you for all the love. Yes.
I'm Ava Joyce. I'm the Dawson County Extension summer intern.
Woo. Okay, so we'll move over here to, we're going to let Eric get started. And please, I'm going to say this for everybody that's presenting today, feel free to interrupt at any time. I want everybody to ask questions. We're going to start off with kind of the weather update, and we'll let kind of those weather conditions and that kind of discussion bleed into our other topics as we talk about other diseases, how they're developing, maybe why they're developing, all those kinds of things. So please feel free to interject whenever you have a question. Let's
Good back there.
I see what's going on. Or not. Just try this again. You know, I'm not sure why it's, man, rookie move right here, which I am. And for some reason, it's now just
And then on
copying.
your screen share, you might be in sharing window instead of sharing screen. So maybe stop the share.
Like up here.
Yeah, now full screen that.
It's this one, right?
Now go to display, duplicate. Okay, now I'll go reshare the Zoom. And share. Don't share the window, share the entire screen. Perfect. So when you switch, it'll be, and then I'll go check. Yeah,
Okay.
good.
There we go. There we go. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Okay. everybody online hear me okay? Okay. Let's start. Does anybody have any questions before I kind of get into a few things? Feel free to stop me at any point, but no, no. Not where you guys are. Okay, so thank you for the invite out. And I tried to tailor this talk to a certain degree to talk about diseases, things that, well, I don't know a whole lot about most plant diseases, but I've learned a good bit in the last couple of years from these guys. And I've learned that certain wind directions and humidity and cloud cover are probably big factors in the ability of some of these diseases to survive and thrive. So I was going to start off by showing a look at where we were for cloud cover in the month of June. So anything you see in the browns, so it was sunnier than average. Anything these blues and greens will show it was cloudier than average for the month of June. So for most of Nebraska, we were about average, maybe slightly cloudier than average as you get into the eastern side of the state.
Eric, does that do smoke as well? Or is that mainly just gonna pick up the clouds?
I would guess this greenhouse state is probably would be picking up a little bit of the smoke. If it was basically what this is doing is determining how much deviation from a certain megajoules per meter squared you would have. So if you had a lot of smoke, that would probably show up as a little bit more cloud cover on here. To this point, we have not had a lot of wildfire smoke affecting Nebraska. That's been mostly to our north and east. This is probably actually, I would say, the least smoky summer we've had in a little while, which is good. We look back at last year, though, so I know last year was very bad for southern rust, and I think it ended up being bad for tar spot. It seemed like any disease that could thrive last year did so, particularly in central and eastern sections of the state. I know visibly the corn last year driving out here almost looked better when I got to like Dawson County than it did further east, and I would swear is this probably because it had less disease issues. So we look at last year, we were not exceptionally cloudy, but we were definitely cloudy if you average the entire summer. A lot of that action was occurring in the month of July. So we have not had as much cloud cover in July this year as we've had last year. I don't have a current map for the month of July. This will come out probably early month of in the month of August. But I think if you were to compare July 2025, July 2026, I think you're going to see July 26 had a good bit more sunshine. In particular, last year we had a lot of cloud cover in the mornings. So we also were keeping that relative humidity at very high levels for basically the entire nighttime, and then probably often through 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then having high humidity again later in the day. I don't have a figure of this, but is anybody from around York? So the ASOS at York at one point went from like July 2nd to like August 10th without ever having a relative humidity drop below 50%. And there were days where they'd have 18 straight hours of relative humidity above 80%. In other words, like we had conditions last year, particularly in areas where you have a lot of irrigation, which probably helps keep that humidity level a little bit higher, where we were seeing that humidity persist for a long period of time. This year, we haven't been quite as humid, thankfully. So this is taking a look. This is from this is kind of a cool website. I just found this about a month ago. It wasn't working as well yesterday, but I was able to get the humidity plot. So basically anything you see in the blue would mean above average humidity, and then the brown would show below average. So we were very, very dry earlier this year, particularly in the spring. And last year we had a lot more blues on here, meaning that we had a lot higher humidity in this region of the state. Gentleman earlier was talking about it being more humid here. It has gotten more humid in this part of the state. It's gotten more humid pretty much anywhere east of the Rockies. So if we look at the last 15 years compared to the second half of the 20th century, our dew points have gone up quite a bit, particularly out here in this part of the state. And that's probably partly because of the irrigation. That's also partly because this planet's getting warmer, the oceans are getting warmer, so the southerly fetch that we're getting from the Gulf just flat out has a little bit more moisture in it than it probably did in 1980. But regardless, climate change plus land use change plus irrigation has led to the plains region becoming more humid than it was in a prior era. It is getting drier as you get toward the west. We also, if you speak of humidity, this is basically precipitable water is basically it's like the integrate water vapor through the atmosphere. Basically, most of the northern hemisphere has higher precipitable water in the last 15 years than it did second half of 20th century, early this century. That is more a reflection of it's getting warmer. Warmer air can hold more water vapor. Doesn't always mean you're gonna get more rain, but it can hold more water vapor. So in other words, like we are seeing, particularly as we get closer to the Gulf, higher precipitable water amounts. That moisture does get infected up here in the summer. So in other words, what's getting infected up here in the summer is just going to have a little bit more moisture and be a little bit warmer than what it was. Okay, so that's kind of the humidity story. Now, the other thing I think is really important is something else I really picked up on after talking with these guys is wind speed and wind direction. Wind direction in particular could be very critical. Now, as you probably will, what direction does the wind typically blow from this time of year around here? Yeah. So this is a wind rose. 180 degrees would be straight south. This is straight north. So northeast, east, southeast, south, so on and so forth. So this year, so far this summer, this is basically June 1st through a couple of days ago, most of our winds have been predominantly from the south or from basically south to east. We've actually had more southeasterly winds this year than straight southerly winds, which is much different than last year. So last year, I mean, the wind rows look similar, but notice that there was a much stronger prevalence of winds from the south. And you'll notice that there was a much bigger bar here, a much bigger window with winds blowing 20 to 30 miles an hour. Our wind speeds had been somewhat lighter this summer than they were last summer. They also had been a bit more from the southeast and straight south. And for southern rust, I think that's important because I think if we're going to get southern rust up here from Texas and Oklahoma, we probably need a wind that's more straight southerly. Southeasterly wind is probably a little bit less favorable for us getting southern rust, particularly in this part of the state. So if we haven't, just pure speculation on my part, one of the reasons maybe we haven't seen as many reports is because we've had winds that have been a bit more from the east than maybe just straight out of the south this summer. And we, to this point, have not had that many days here where the winds have been straight out of the southwest or west. So again, it looks pretty dry here coming in. I'm sure as you go further west, it looks even drier, but we haven't necessarily had a lot of days where the wind's been blowing out of the southwest 20 miles an hour with dew points in the 50s.
I would say, so one of the cool things about these is me, Tamer, and Eric all hopped on a call last year to figure out why southern rust was so bad. And we were essentially able to pick out some of the worst years of disease, southern rust disease, based off these graphs. And so one of the other years was like 2006, I think was a big year. Kind of similar more to like 2024 and 2025.
It matters too if they just a continuous straight fetch from like basically from the Gulf up here.
Yeah, and so one of the things you had mentioned just the other day was like the persistence of southern winds.
Yep.
So it's not as persistent this year, right?
It has not been as persistent. We've not really had like that 7-day window where winds have just been blowing straight from the south without any sort of break. There's been times where winds have been blowing more southerly here, but there isn't necessarily a continuous southerly fetch all the way down into Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas. And I do think that probably matters. So we've had a couple stretches of that. We had one stretch of that in late June, but I don't think it was, I think it got broken early enough that it probably maybe helped keep those spores at bay a little bit. But I do sincerely think that if there has been a difference in spore numbers, it's probably because I think our winds have been a bit more southeasterly and easterly than just pure southerly like we had last year. And also there was a window, I think there was about 4 or 5 straight days last year, right around the solstice, where we had southerly winds that were sustained at 20, 25 miles an hour for like 4 or 5 days. And that's very possible that's what brought that stuff up.
We should acknowledge too that, you know, it varies year to year because of how much last year, how much corn was produced in the south versus what they've had in the past. And so there was a lot more acreage and a lot more rust just out there to push up our way. And all the other factors were just worse last year.
Sure. But if we look at this year compared to,
Just to warn you guys, I stayed at this hotel last night and this happened twice. I had to go outside.
Oh. I know,
There's
there's
a
an
false-
exit right
There
there.
was a false alarm. No, we'll go up there. This is probably another false alarm, but they're gonna make us go outside.
Is this an evacuation type thing? I, let me.
They made us do it last night, but maybe they won't.
all that hotel.
Somebody else is sleep down. Is the alarm off?
It'll go, don't worry. If they're gonna make us get out.
Okay, is everybody awake now?
That door leads straight outside.
Yeah, probably.
Good.
We're okay. I don't smell any smoke. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So, you know.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
See,
So if we compare this year to a longer term climatology, so if we go looking at 2026 compared to 81 to 2020, we have also had I would say, a more easterly shift in the wind direction so far this summer. So in other words, we tend to have our winds more prominently straight out of the south with some more out of southwest than we've had this year, and a bit less out of the southeast east we've had this year. We've also, I would say to this point, have not had as many days where wind speeds have been over 20 miles an hour. That's sustained levels. So looking what we are going to in the future, this is the temperature expected. Granted, I would take some of this with a little grain of salt to get a little bit further out here. But we are going to be very hot here next week and pretty humid. Likely, hopefully cooling off as we get toward the August 4th, 5th time frame. I would suspect that temperatures actually will back off here at least for a couple of days next week. There will be some chances of moisture, especially as you go a little bit further toward the west. Right now, the global models are struggling with, which is not uncommon, they struggle with convection, with thunderstorms in the summer. But what I really want to point out here are a couple of things. One, the sky cover. So, in other words, we're not expecting a lot of days coming up here with a lot of cloud cover. So most days you would probably have a fair amount of sun. Humidity values probably higher in the mornings, but we're not looking at just a long stretch of time staying above 75%. So I think that's also probably somewhat favorable. And I would imagine these higher temperatures are, I would assume, are less favorable for tar spot.
About 72, we want to be about below 72 degrees for favorable tar spot.
Okay, well, we'll probably be above that at nighttime here.
Yeah, for optimal.
hell, it just slows it down,
Yeah.
yeah.
Southern rest likes it warmer,
Okay, well,
like 80s.
okay. But what I really want to point out here was the wind direction. So the winds are basically most likely going to be mostly from the southeast or straight south coming up here for at least the next 10 days. Maybe there might be a brief stretch early this next week where the winds are blowing more out of the northeast, but by and large, what we've seen so far this year, wind southeast to south, that is probably going to continue for most of the next couple of weeks. And you'll also notice that they are not expecting significantly high wind speed. So it's not going to be that windy here next week. So there's not going to be a whole lot of a breeze to help make it feel a little bit cooler. But we're also not expecting, winds cranking out of the south at 20 miles an hour. All things being equal, higher wind speeds mean higher potentially evapotranspiration. So we see the pivots are running next week, more of that water is actually going to reach the surface and maybe be more effective at hitting the soil. Again, there's going to be some chance of getting some moisture out here this next week. I know right now the chances don't look as good, but given where that ridge is, there's going to be a lot of moisture coming up from, up around the Gulf and then up through, picking up some Pacific moisture coming up around from the southwest. So I think the atmospheric water is going to be relatively high here next week. It's a matter of, can we squeeze it out? I mentioned the heat. So this ridge, earlier in the month was sitting up here, it retrograded back toward the south. It's been squashed a little bit more this week, which is why it's been cooler. This is building back toward the north and the east, and it is going to get very hot here across a good portion of the state this next week. I would anticipate this little area of the state where we have the most irrigation may stay in the mid to upper 90s. But you get a little bit outside this area where you lose the Amount of irrigation, amount of corn, we're probably looking at temperatures getting in at least the lower 100s. I would suspect that parts of Panhandle might crack 104 to 108, maybe possibly 110 on Sunday. As you go further toward the east of the state, I think we're going to see dew points get into the upper 70s. So heat index values over where I am on Sunday and Monday may crack 115. So I'm not looking forward to walking home from work on Monday afternoon. Looking at temperatures next week, we are expected to be above average. I think our hardest days here are probably going to be Sunday, Monday. I think we'll cool off a little bit after that. And I think it's really going to be dependent upon where thunderstorms are, if we have extra cloud cover, if we actually do have a little bit more cloud cover and precipitation, what's currently projected next week. Highs here may only be mid 80s to low 90s. If we have more sunshine, probably looking at temperatures 92 to 96. Probably not dropping off a lot of ice. We're probably looking at a long stretch of low temperatures here, being above average, which I know for you all is probably, the average probably 63 to 64 out here. It's cooler than home. But probably, I would say at least upper 60s to low 70s, if not mid 70s, times will be pretty common here for overnight lows for most of the next week to 10 days. Yeah, there's going to be chances of rain. Right now, the ensembles are a little bit more bullish on the Front Range, High Plains region, getting a little bit more rain, less so up further toward the east. Again, I think there's going to be chances for a lot of this area to get some moisture, but it's certainly not a guarantee. And the drought situation in the state, which had been kind of getting better, is starting to kind of go in reverse. And I'm concerned, just given the amount of heat we may have here the next 10 to 14 days, that if we are not getting the rain, we're going to see things turn sideways pretty quickly, particularly for any rain-fed crops that haven't started to do so. Looking forward a little bit, CPC does favor equal chances for both precip and temperature in the first half of August. Basically, how I would interpret that, they're not really showing any real signal. They are more confident being warmer to our west and to our east, and they're more confident on the southwest monsoon remaining relatively active, which that does seem relatively likely to me. I think we're going to continue to have chances of getting moisture into this region in the first half of August, but I'm not necessarily seeing a pattern change coming that suggests that we're just going to turn super wet either. My guess is some places will do fairly well the next 2 to 3 weeks. A lot of places are going to continue to get missed out. And I would say if you have been short of moisture the last month, the prospects of you getting better moisture are probably slimmer than places have been getting it. Precipitation recycling is a real thing. And we basically have seen, particularly if you look at portions of northeastern Nebraska getting to western Iowa, that area has been a big hot spot for dryness here the last 30 to 45 days. That may be relatively hard to break. A lot of this is just because right now the atmospheric flow in the northern hemisphere is very weak. So when you do get these ridges that set up in the summer, they tend to kind of meander around. They'll weaken and retrograde back toward the west, and they'll move back toward the east. But we're not necessarily seeing, a major dip in the jet stream, which is really going to drive this out of here. So this feature, this ridge, upper level ridge of high pressure over the southwestern U.S. is probably going to be a relatively prominent feature for a while. If that sticks around for most month of August, we are going to see the heat pulse in and out of here. So I would anticipate temperatures in August probably often being on the warm side, particularly in the western half of Nebraska, if not the entire state and the western Corn Belt. You go further toward the east, most of the I states, I think, will probably prospects are better for cooler temperatures over there. Drought outlook, good news is that we are expecting probably to see maybe a little bit of improvement in the Panhandle. I do think drought is probably going to persist, though, in this portion of the state to a certain degree, and I am concerned about drought redeveloping across other portions of eastern Nebraska and more of Iowa. So who's been following El Nino?
I hear about it a lot right
Okay.
now, with it being like the strongest El Nino.
It's not there yet, but it's heading there.
It's heading there.
So, I mean, these are the sea surface temperature anomalies. So anywhere you see the oranges and reds, means sea surface temperatures are well above average. So these are basically almost historically warm, if not historically warm, sea surface temperatures off the coast of Peru. Also some very warm water off the Baja, but this reverse C shape that you see here with this really big blob of warm water, that is probably actually I would say right now that's having more impact on our sensible weather than El Nino. El Nino is not to this point having a major impact on our weather. I think it will also get to the fall. But right now, I think this colder water here and some of this colder water here is kind of helping keep this ridge a little bit more prominent over the southwest. Again, its placement is not such that the entire region is just going to go over hot and dry for weeks, but it is placed such that we are going to be in and out of the heat and flirting with storms or not getting rain. So that's why I'm saying that some places will do okay the next 2-3 weeks to months. Some places are not. A lot of places are probably not going to do that great, if I'm just being perfectly honest. So, last year was better for precip in the summer. This year has been a little bit worse.
So with the El Nino, there's like more storms or more. When you say that the El Nino is going to impact our fall, does that mean there's going to be more chances for rain or like heavier rains or?
I think the potential for that is definitely going up.
Okay.
So what El Nino does, so El Nino really starts having its impacts on the mid latitudes and northern hemisphere, if it's going to have impacts. It starts having them more in the fall and into our winter. So basically what it does is it helps enhance the subtropical jet, basically from Hawaii toward California. So I think what's more likely going to happen is that we'll see a more active storm track come in this fall. What we've had in the fall a lot in the last several years is we've had a lot of upper level ridging sitting somewhere between the Rockies and the Appalachians. That has kept the storm track to the north. That's cut the moisture off. So we really have not had good mechanisms for getting decent moisture here in the fall for most of the last several years. I'd say 2019 was the last year that we actually had decent moisture on a widespread basis in the fall. Some places last year did okay for about a month, but then the last part of the fall was very dry. And then we were extremely dry and incredibly warm this last winter, so that caused a big problem. And I think one of the issues that we've had with drought in the state in recent years has not been our summers that have been the problem. It's been we haven't gotten rains in the fall. We've had warm winters. We have not a lot of snow cover, and then we've had a often poor starts to spring. So just getting that rain in the summer is nice, but that also means it's hard to get recharge. We have not had a good period of recharge for most of the state in several years.
And so for the ones that are farther southwest around like the Holdridge area, if you guys cover that, they get a lot of their surface water from like the North Platte River Basin. And so one of the big talks was how the North Platte River Basin was like more than 10 inches below like the median or something like that.
Yeah, they had historically poor snowfall
I was gonna say
last
they had,
year.
like the lowest, one of the lowest.
And then you had that
years.
insanely warm March, so the lightning's melted early. So this is
Right now, that was really impacting a lot of the wheat in the southern panhandle. And I think because they went from 90 days of surface water access to like 45, like it got cut in half. That's how low they were. And so that's an expectation that if something like that continues to persist or they don't get some refill, that will start impacting surface water here more in central Nebraska.
Yeah.
I don't know if you, I guess, Ogallala, do you have guys out there that ended up getting impacted by some of that?
Yeah, up in the Panhandle, there's 3 counties right around Scotts Bluff, and they kind of struggled getting insurance this year on row crop. They were told to do preventative plant, and I've heard anywhere from like 25 to 30 days worth of water, and it didn't come in their usual time slides. So
yeah. So if you look at again, if you see this dark red here, that basically means that there is a roughly over 80% chance of being in a very strong El Nino this fall and winter. So this El Nino will peak between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There is a reasonable chance this is going to be the strongest El Nino on record. And is this going to have major impacts for global agriculture? I think this actually could benefit us in some ways, but for some parts of the world, it is going to be very problematic. We take a look at August historically. So if we think about the last few times that we were going into a stronger El Nino in the month of August, 82, 97, 15 to 23. Traditionally, it is cooler to our east, not showing a real strong signal in our area. Again, I'm a little bit more suspicious that we will be warmer than average, particularly in the western half of the state, maybe the entire state in the month of August. And precipitation, again, not a real strong signal one way or the other, a little bit drier to our south and to our east. But it's not screaming major drought development, but it's also not screaming major drought improvement either. And I think from a disease perspective, I think we would potentially have a few more cold frontal passages. That does appear to be possible as we get in early August, we may see things shift the way we may start getting more frontal passages coming through here with more northerly wind flow. Also some drier air coming, which I think would be potentially pretty useful. Again, particularly, I know Tal and I were kind of talking about drought relief. Right now, the global models are all kind of in agreement on it being wetter than average here in the fall. So I do think we are going to potentially have an opportunity this fall to get some meaningful drought relief. Because if we get good rains in October and November, that would actually go a long way to recharging the soil. And I'm saying to recharge the aquifer in a real meaningful way, just by getting some rains in October, November. But that would help the soil moisture out. Like that would maybe try to get some river levels back up. So hopefully we do get some of this. Not saying I want to harvest delayed by a lot, but I would love to get some drought relief in a large way across this portion of the country this fall. And I'm going to stop there. I will take some questions. I know I've gone a little bit on time. And
Does the El Nino impact temperatures at all in the fall?
so some El Ninos have been a little on the cool side here in October, a little bit in November, but you get December, January, February, it tends to be pretty mild here in the winter.
Because since I've heard some of this talk, I wonder if, I mean, like, if this year is a year where there's potentially a higher chance for like an early snow or early frost with maybe like a storm or something like that that blows in, maybe comparative to the last couple of years where it seems like we don't get a freeze till late October almost.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say I would see a significantly earlier freeze coming in.
Okay.
It is certainly possible that we may have higher probability than we've had in recent years snow in November.
Gotcha. Okay.
And yeah, certainly I think if you look at some of the analogs for El Nino, we were at times relatively chilly in November. I would say the El Nino winters here historically are not necessarily, they're mild, but they're mild because we just stay consistently from like upper 20s or high, upper 20s to mid 40s, right? We don't have as many of the really cold days, but we don't have as many of the nice days either.
Gotcha.
Didn't have more cloud cover. But I would say that there is a reasonable chance that we will be statistically cooler than the last winter. The last winter was basically the warmest on record for a lot of the state.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Eric.
Yep. I'll be around for a while if you guys have questions.
If you guys can't tell, I invited Eric out here to ask him all my questions that I've been thinking about for the last 2 months now, so. Yeah.
Where is?
All right. So this is all your crop stuff over here, I think.
Okay, I might
Cool.
have duplicated some. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. Good to see you all again. I'm the soybean pathologist, right? So I'm going to talk about soybean diseases. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to jump in. I had maybe planned some slides, but as I was driving out here this morning, I got to thinking about different things. And I don't have any pictures to put up because I was taking them all as I was driving down the interstate and they're blurry. But what I saw were a little foggy in places. I drove from Lincoln. It was overcast, so it was dark and it was wet. And I saw a lot of pivots running on corn and beans, which makes sense. If you need water, water is the most important thing. So people are putting water on. But white mold is the thing I'm most concerned about as far as a foliar disease of soybean in Nebraska. I'd say across the board, white mold. There's other things here. We have things like frog eye leaf spot. We've got bacterial blights, which are a separate thing. We just don't get a ton of foliar fungi causing issues. We've got fungi that cause issues for other reasons. We've got things in the soil. We've got things that get on the stem later on in the year or cause issues later on. But as far as white mold, the people I want to target with white mold are the growers that have had it. And they typically know if they've had it because it's one of the most, it can be the most devastating soybean disease. It's a lot of them you might lose 5%, 10%, 15% when it comes to diseases. But if you get into a white mold pocket when you're driving that combine, you can see those yields just drop off to nothing. So that's the severity that white mold can cause. but I see it highly pocketed. I see some growers that really struggle with it. I see their neighbors that aren't touched by it. And there's probably several reasons for that. But it's certainly frustrating that it seems to get drug around an entire farm once it shows up in one field. So, uh-oh.
Do you guys have much for growers talking about white mold right now out there
in places.
in places? Probably the guys that have been hit by it before.
I think the statement that when somebody's had it
Yeah.
on their farm, they understand the impact it can have and they manage it.
Yeah, and it's so wild that their neighbor might not think about it at all and they've never touched it. And I guess one really basic reason why that could be is if it shows up somewhere, that field gets harvested. A simple way to spread it would be harvest that field first and drive that combine around the rest of the farm, and it's gonna blow out. Over many years, I think it can get worse and worse like that. It's certainly more going on with that. This is a pathogen that has spores that are blowing. And I instead of slides, I figured I'd just show you a whole bunch of web tabs I opened up. So this is white mold on the stem of a soybean plant. This is how this disease would look in, say, middle of August. Now, that wasn't infected middle of August. That would have been infected July 10th to July 20th, somewhere in there, maybe a little earlier. But you can really tell when it was infected based on when that plant would have had a flower at that node, because it's infecting through those flowers. This is not a great picture, but often we'll go out and I'll see, maybe right now, somewhere in Nebraska, there's a soybean stem that just has some bleaching around a node, maybe an inch above to an inch below. That's where it was infected. That flower is fallen off by this point, and it's just gonna spread. Give that 3 more weeks and it'll look like this. And then these chunks, those are called sclerotia. That's how this survives, and that's what's getting spread around those farms and combines. And then in the off season, you can walk to those white mold fields and ask that grower where the white mold spot was, and they'll point you, go out there, and you can see those chunks laying on the soil surface. There's going to be more down in the soil surface. There's going to be, they'll be around. But that's going to sit there, and those will sit there for a decade and be fine.
If that gets tilled under, is that gonna impact?
You could bury those. You'd have to get them pretty deep to take them out of service. But then they can wait, and if you till it again and stir them back up, they're going to come back into service. So I don't think that's an economical way to handle this, but here's one that's been buried a little bit and it's growing mushrooms out of it. So these are, they can maybe grow 1.5 inches, 2 inches. Most of the time, these are just laying right on the soil surface. So right under there is probably one of those chunks, and those mushrooms grew. Notice the soil surface, how wet it is. There's some other little fungi growing on residue and stuff, but the soil surfaces being wet is extremely important. And how do we keep surfaces wet, Eric?
How long does the soil have to stay persistently wet for it to really thrive?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's maybe a 2-part answer. You get rain on your yards sometime in spring, summer, you walk out after a night of rain and you see mushrooms there. So they can just pop up like that pretty quick. But it's more of a numbers game in this case. So if we get a morning where these pop up quick and then it dries out, they're not going to be making many spores. So it's more of like the longer you have wet surfaces, the more mushrooms you're going to get. And these can last quite a while. I can grow these in a dish in a lab, and if I keep them wet, they'll stay there for a month. And every day, if you take that lid off, they'll blow those spores out.
I think Dylan has a video of that on his YouTube page. It's actually.
Oh yeah, it's probably on our YouTube page. I should have showed it right now, but they'll just keep making spores as long as it's wet. So it's sort of a numbers game, right? You have susceptible plants and it stays wet. These are just going to keep going day after day after day. So what's it take to keep soil surfaces wet for a long time? Closed canopies. And I think Nebraska is a little behind the curve as far as closed canopies this year. They've just closed slow. I don't know why, because we seem to have record early planting. Things just didn't close up as quick as I thought they would.
So a handful of things that we talked about during kind of like our whole team meeting the other day is we thought we saw quite a bit of cupping, and we don't know if that held beans back a little bit. We don't know if it's maybe we didn't have. I think there in June it was a little bit cooler. Eric, is that
I mean, June this year was cooler than it has been in several years, but it was still slightly above historical norms.
Yeah.
So not that bad, but.
No, there was about a 2 week stretch though from like the 10th through. No, maybe it'll be after. Anyway, there was about a 2 week stretch where it was definitely cooler than average. We also had a lot of cloud cover times.
Yeah.
So that might have had an impact. And I think another thing too, we were very, very, very dry going into the spring. And then we did have a couple of cool snaps in there that interspersed with heat.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the temperature swings earlier this year had anything to do with that.
And because I would say just based off what I see while driving through counties, I don't see much for soybeans on 30-inch rows closed really at all. I mean, obviously the stuff that's 15 or anything like that, I think closed probably pretty quick. I don't know if anybody's seeing something different,
There's
but
certain varieties that seem to have stuck out that aren't closing quite as fast, I know, and then there's other ones that have, and it seems like it's pretty well linked to the variety, I guess.
Gotcha. Is that like a bushy trait or
So,
I
yeah,
don't know what
yeah.
the name of that would be.
We were down in Finkelman last week and we were taking note of some of that, just some beans that were really slow canopying and going back through some of the traits, they were the taller, skinnier beans, and then the ones,
Yeah.
the bushier ones, they're also fighting off some of that can better too. And that's what we were trying to zero out.
Gotcha.
And it seemed to be variety by variety.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, so when it comes to managing white mold, a simple recommendation. You have a question?
Sorry,
Oh,
yeah.
please.
So if you wanted to rotate, what would you do to prevent, say you wanted to plant corn the next year,
Yeah.
rotate fields? What preventative measures would you take, or could you even plant?
Yeah, so if you have a white mold field, a great management that fits farming operations here is rotate into not soybeans again. I can only think of one grower who only plants beans. Seems like everyone else is on a corn soybean rotation, but if you keep putting beans and beans and beans in that field, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. I said those little structures last a long time, but they will degrade. Some of them are going to go away. I have a video, a time-lapse video, where I swear a nightcrawler grabs one and eats it, which is a whole nother thought. It's not my top research priority, but if we have time,
But I mean, row spacing too. I
yeah.
mean, planting 30 inches with a taller bean that's not,
yeah.
but then you have a whole slew of other issues with
Yeah.
beans there.
Yeah, so that's the recommendation too. Move from 15-inch rows to 30-inch rows. I know a lot of growers around here who've done that in some of their fields. Because the canopy is going to be more open, more wind's going to blow through there, that surface is going to dry out, you're going to have more weed problems. You're going to have more insect problems potentially with deck Ds on soybeans, right? So there's trade-offs to all of these things. If you switch from soybeans and don't plant them at all and go full corn, you're going to have more corn issues. So it's always a trade-off, and rotation seems to keep them all tamped down a little bit.
There was a time there though that you were like able to pick out fields because you went like back every like 2 years, right? This 2023
Yeah.
was a bad year and it seemed like it was just like 2021, 2023,
Yeah.
2025. Those were fields you wanted to check because
Exactly. So it's those fields. That picture I showed of those sclerotia on the soil surface was a field we knew it was bad the year before, and that was going into corn. 2023, they were bad again. So 21 and 23 were bad years. I really thought 25 would be a bad year, but what happened? We had a warmer July in 2025, which seemed to favor southern rust. So there's a disease for every environment, it seems like. And white mold is a cooler season disease. It enjoys cooler temperatures. It's a bigger problem historically more up north in the Dakotas and Wisconsin. And up there, they've done a lot of work to develop weather models that are going to give an idea of when this problem is going to be bad or severe. So here's one of those I'll show. This is the crop risk tool. You can find it on the Crop Protection Network's website. If you go to this crop protection network, that's basically all of us soybean pathologists and corn pathologists in the Midwest that put a lot of research into these tools. So this one, we've got a model specifically for white mold. You can come in here and you can add a field. And if we look at this field in Grand Island area, where this has become more and more of a problem, especially in irrigated fields, we can see that the risk is pretty flat. There's not much going on for this. 3% risk is what it's predicting, a low risk. But I want to point out what happens if I change this to irrigated. We come in here and Eric, yes,
So you mentioned cooler temperatures were favorable for white mold. Does it be cooler all summer or is this during certain periods of time?
yeah. So that infection window is really going to be early July, early to mid July.
So-
We're kind of getting to the end of that.
July, most of the first half of July 2023 was quite cool for this area.
Yep.
So that probably did it.
Yeah, definitely.
So the pathogen gets in through the flowers,
Yes, it does.
that R1 to R3. I don't know
Yep,
what
and-
all flowers are.
Yeah, so we still have flowers. They're indeterminate soybeans, so we get some early ones right before the solstice. Don't worry about those. If you go and put a product on, you're gonna protect the flowers that you get chemical onto. If you apply when there's one flower in that field, you're gonna protect one flower. So you want to kind of, and your risk is small because there's only one flower to infect. So you kind of want to balance it out and maybe put an application on, say, late R1 or R2 early. You're going to protect a flush of flowers, get some protection, but come back in maybe if they have a big issue, Eric.
The other thing about 23 that was unique, we were, especially once you got a little bit east here, it was insanely dry for
Yes.
that spring, early summer was, I mean, the point where some people couldn't even get a crop.
Shocking. This is
Yeah.
what I thought
Then it started raining on a pretty regular basis.
on July.
Like, you know, basically very into June through
Mhm.
the rest of summer, most places had at least some decent rain. Some places had a lot of rain the rest of summer after that. So we probably went from being like no moisture to
Yeah.
surplus of moisture.
Yeah,
So
and
it was a weird mid-season flip of conditions.
Yep.
I mean, usually if it flips, usually it's going the other direction.
And we should sit down and take apart the weather data a little bit, because I've got estimates of this for all, historically in Nebraska. But to figure out, there's just some weird things. So that made no sense. We didn't have strong canopy closure in early 2023. But what happened is growers were irrigating a lot earlier on beans than they would have normally done. And it was those irrigated fields that really struggled. Watch me change this model from dry rain fed to irrigated. Suddenly you go from a flat risk. Here we are, I would say, yeah, that's high risk. Irrigation is going to drive this. And that's why where this has been historically a northern issue where it's cooler, it's finding a home here in irrigated pivots in Nebraska, where it's traditionally too warm. And Talon's data from his research has shown just how much irrigation water can cool that field off. Now, where this has been the most severe in Nebraska has been sandy fields, where they're irrigating more and more and more. So they're just keeping that cool and wet in those fields, driving those conditions. And an irrigation is a lot different than, say, a rainfall on a soil that can hold a lot of moisture. In those sandy fields, they're going to need to put a little bit on often. So that's a completely different world for the disease. Now, this is 30-inch spacing. You guys probably all walked 15-inch beans before. It's dense in there. This doesn't even list worst case scenario, drilled beans, 7.5-inch beans. You can just assume the risk is going to be really high, but watch me turn this risk from 30-inch, this model from 30-inch to 15-inch. Extreme risk for white mold when you get into those situations. So we've got the data that shows if you've got open canopies in a dry field and your soil can hold water and you're not putting on a ton of irrigation, your risk is low. But if you're on narrow road beans with canopy closed and you're keeping it wet, it doesn't matter if we're in North Dakota or here, it can be the right conditions for it under that environment. So I just wanted to show this is available. This is also looking at weather data as well.
Utilizing artificial intelligence to predict
So-
this, is that gonna get better and better in the future?
Yeah, these will continue to get better. We're collecting data still that we're feeding into these models. This is the second generation of these. There was an app previously called Forecaster, and this is sort of built up with more data. We're going to continue collecting. The big problem or the throughput issue is just collecting data and monitoring those fields. It's just a lot of work, but
So that app came out of
Wisconsin. Yeah.
And so up in Wisconsin, I've heard that it works amazing.
Mhm.
But there were some concerns about it in Nebraska because, well, we haven't we didn't create the app. We don't have 10 years of data put into
Yeah.
it. So it's maybe not as accurate here in the state, but I mean, it's gonna be really, I mean,
Yeah.
it's still all based off weather conditions. It's not based off necessarily location.
Yep, yep.
So,
So most of the data was from Wisconsin initially. So that's the thing. We've been trying to collect more of it from here to feed into this. But I think the biggest predictor of white mold in Nebraska is, did you have white mold in that field last time you had beans? And the way application of a fungicide works, it's going to be easiest to, I hate to say it, but schedule those applications for the areas you've really struggled with it and continue to monitor that. It's hard to rush out there when you see those mushrooms pop up and decide I'm going to go apply a fungicide now. So
Dylan, after you harvest or something like that, if you go back and look at your yield map or whatever, and you see like this spot where you're like, yeah, there was white mold there. I had
Yeah.
0 bushels from this
yeah,
10-foot square. If you take a drone out there and spray a fungicide just like on the soil, is that going to impact those sclerotia at all?
great question. So there are products on the market now. Contans was the first one, that are biologicals that will go in and feed on those sclerotia. They eat other fungi. If you spray them, they'll go do that. Contans has a pretty rigorous application schedule. Say, harvest the corn crop, apply it, come back in the spring, apply it again. But we have trials running right now that show that they do reduce the number of sclerotia. There are many other products available, and I think there's a whole category of residue breakdown products. So I think there's promise for those. And I think the way white mold is distributed in fields is one that could be highly targeted. So say content, it can be pretty expensive, right? But you don't have to apply a whole field. You can apply those areas, look at your yield maps and walk around out there, and you could do targeted applications of some of those products. Good question. Okay, so we're short on time, I think. It's 11 already. So,
That's fine.
okay, that's all right. No, it's a good discussion. Another thing, so we've got other models on the topic of weather and predicting when disease is going to be bad. I wanted to just point out that we've collected tons of data over the last 2 decades, and we've built some really neat models. I co-lead a project called the SCN Coalition with Ohio State University soil pathologist, and we have built this tool called the SCN Profit Checker. You guys have all probably heard of soybean cyst nematode. It's out there, but we're still in the western front here in Nebraska. It's moving west, and it's getting into these areas at higher rates. Now, just because it's been here in the counties for a couple of years doesn't really mean it's at meaningful levels or that it's in very many fields. So it's going to continue to get more and more of those. And I want to show this. This is built off 35,000 plots of data. So if I choose Nebraska in this dropdown, and this is at the scncoalition.com. Now, the Nebraska Soybean Board pays for free soybean cyst nematode testing for any Nebraska growers. So if it's Nebraska dirt in a bag and a grower sends it to me, I'll count it and I'll send them back a report that says how many eggs you have in there. The reason that's important is because you can't see really if you have soybean cyst nematode. You can have a really nice looking field that's losing 5 to 10% to yield with no symptoms. We've got research that shows up to 30% of yield loss can occur with no noticeable above ground symptoms, which is crazy. That's a lot of yield to not notice, right? With a dying plant, right? But it just doesn't show it. It's a parasite that's just sapping resources off of it. So, but I will say the median SCN positive sample in Nebraska has 4,000 eggs per 100 cc of soil. And I always get the question when I send out a report saying that's the median or that's what you have. They say, well, what does that mean? And I can't tell a grower what that means for their field, because the soil is what's really determining how much yield loss you have. So say if you get a field with 20% sand and a pH of, let's start at 7. What's our yield expectation? We'll go with easy numbers. That's a 7.3% yield loss. And 4,000 is a very, I would say, I mean, it's average, but it's a low number of SCN. A lot of fields have less, but I've seen 80 or 100,000. You can lose that much yield. But just to show off the models a little bit, what was that, 7.3%? If we go to a sandier soil, that yield loss jumps up a lot. So we have the data that shows what these numbers mean. The models are developing. We're still collecting data. Data collection is the big holdup with developing these tools. But I just wanted to show what we're getting. And I've shown on this crop protection network risk model, the white mold one. But if you click this drop down, there are corn models in here as well. There's frog eye leaf spot model that we've been working on a lot. And we're going to continue to add more and more models into these. It just takes a lot of time to collect that data. But use these and think about these as growers are deciding for applications.
And each educator, crops educator, should have like those bags that he's talked about to collect samples for free that they just hand out. I wasn't smart enough to bring mine, but
Yeah, I got to.
I have some at my office. Every educator has them and they'll mail them to you or whatever. If you got a grower that's really thinking that, well, I'm missing 15% of my yield, where'd it go?
I mean, the thing I get a lot is just bean yields haven't kept up with corn yields. Well, SCN's been getting a lot worse too, and it's our number one biological pest of soybean right now. So if a grower's gonna pull samples, just suggest to them maybe they'd want to split some samples and send some into the lab. They can we can count a field or they can grid sample a field. It doesn't matter.
And it's usually the top 8 inches that you want.
Top
right?
8
8
inches.
Any time of year.
Any time of year. It's easy.
So we have a question from online. I don't think you can see that up there. So I'm gonna read that off. It's a question about pH and the impact for soybean cyst nematode to thrive, and does a higher or lower pH make eggs less viable? I would even rephrase that or add to it about just the impact on overall plant health and the soybean cyst reproduction.
Yeah, the quick answer is,
I don't know, you might need to repeat it. I don't.
The question online, how is pH impacting the yield loss to soybean cyst nematode? Just like higher sand makes yield loss more severe, higher pH does as well. So we've got some differing pHs across the state. So in some of those pockets, be aware, higher pH is going to really ramp up those yield losses.
We have another question on fungicide use for white mold.
Mm-hmm.
And asking about, is yield loss to disease offset by yield loss to weeds and a more open canopy system? Or is the ROI different for chemical use?
No, that's tough. I always say, pick your worst problem and target that, and then next year you can rotate to whatever new problem you've created. So, no, it's tough. It's really hard. It's hard to say. I mean, that kind of goes around to just the idea of
how resistant is your polymer?
Yeah. What's going on your farm? I mean, Cobra or Lactofen has been talked about as a white mold treatment as well. North Dakota State University pathologist Wade Webster just posted on Twitter a really good picture showing their Lactofen trials that they're doing right now to compare that. But in those trials, that Cobra's just burned their bean plots back, so they've got really open canopies. So that alone could be driving some of that. What other issues are you going to create? It just depends on your field history. So it gets very complex. I want to mention some other things real quick before we let Tamara, the main event, come talk. Sudden death syndrome was really bad in parts of the state last year. It's going to show up in about 3 weeks or so, if it's going to be around, maybe sooner with it being so hot. But these plants were infected when they were seedlings early on in the season. So if you get a wet, we got early planting, it was relatively dry, but we got some areas where it got wet after that and record early. So we had some beans sitting in the ground longer than normal. So we could see issues like this show up. The longer a plant sits in the ground, the more seedling diseases it's going to struggle with. Sudden death syndrome has this really obvious interveinal chlorosis symptom, but there's like 10 other things that cause that exact symptom. So it's tempting to sit in your truck and look out at that field and call it sudden death syndrome. But even we had an issue one year where we went out to a drone fungicide trial that was going on by Nebraska City. And we walked out and We got to the first treated plot with the fungicide and it had sudden death syndrome everywhere. It was horrible.
In a
And then-
perfect square.
In a perfect square. And we walked to the untreated and we were like, where'd it go? And then we get to the next treated one, perfect sudden death syndrome again. Well, that was triazole fungicide toxicity. So if you have a triazole fungicide, which that's one of the main fungicide groups, and you hit those beans just right, you can get that symptom as well. Pretty common. So just be aware if you see something like that, take the time to figure out if it's actually sudden death syndrome before you're gonna make a big investment in a seed treatment.
I will say that was actually very interesting to see, because
Yeah.
usually, I don't know if it has to do with the gallons per acre that they use. I don't know if drones are a little bit lighter, that maybe it's a little bit
Yeah,
more concentrated. I don't know if we necessarily ever figured out why it was so bad, but that was one of the worst burns that I've seen.
Yeah.
Probably. And it was probably the only, I would have thought it was SDS and wouldn't have thought twice about it.
Oh, I didn't think
Unless it was
twice.
in perfect squares,
Yeah.
right
yeah.
along our treatments. It
So-
was really, really interesting to see.
And I think looking back on that, one of the big factors was it was 95 plus degrees when they flew it
Yeah.
that afternoon, so heat's gonna really drive that. We don't talk about it as much in the north central region, but in the south, they really struggle with this. In the south, they can get that all the time if they're applying at the wrong time of day. But just be aware that it does happen. And one of the giveaways for sudden death syndrome, if you pull that plant up, you get this blue growth on the stem. But my predecessor, he told me he had never seen that. And I had never really seen it here either, but if you go to Iowa, it's on all of them. So there's different, I don't know what you call them, maybe siblings of the exact same pathogen. I think we've got some different groups of these around, but what I've noticed in the last year or two is along the eastern edge of the state, we're starting to see more and more of that blue on the sudden death syndrome plants. Just slightly different versions of the pathogen. But this happens. Resistant variety makes a huge difference. There.
You already said it, but we did have a question. Is it just the triazoles, the group threes causing that intervenal symptom? Or other classes as well?
I think it's just the triazoles. I've never heard about it with any others. But yeah, good questions. Other comments on sudden death? This overlapping with soybean
It's a
systemic.
root disease,
Yeah,
it's not a foliar thing.
so if you pull those leaves and send it to the diagnostic clinic, I can't tell you if it's sudden death or not. We need the whole plant. It's a root problem. We can't even do a molecular test on those leaves to see if it's there.
That's just a symptom. That's just what
Yep.
shows up.
And then,
Is there significant like root decline, like the roots are gone? Well, there you go.
yeah, you can notice on this one, they're not doing too hot. So if you pull that and you don't see the blue, it still might be sudden death. Another one I didn't mention, brown stem rot. Split those stems open. Sudden death syndrome plant's gonna look creamy inside, but not crazy. Brown stem rot plant will be completely rotted out in there. This gets more and more complicated when we add Dectes stem borer into the mix because it's gonna eat out the inside of that. So you could get SDS plants that have Dectes stem borer that look like brown stem rot too. So an easy answer to this is the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic. Their base charge for identifying and actually testing and verifying a lot of these things is like $25. So that's really cheap if you're thinking about putting on a seed treatment next year. So verify those. Another complexity I'll mention is this. This is a new disease called red crown rot that has not been found in Nebraska yet. It became, Eric, you asked me before, it was an issue in the South on peanuts in the 70s. And then it became an issue on soybeans. And it sat around in Louisiana, not really causing issues for a long time. And then it shot north into the Midwest and just was all over the I-states. Let me jump to that. No, I'll give you some better pictures first. But again, look at that foliar symptom. It's just like the same thing. And really all the reason everything causes that symptom is because where's the hardest part on the plant to get water to? It's got to go from the roots up the stem, up these to the leaves, out this mid vein at these veins, and then it's gotta move through smaller and smaller veins to get to the middle of the veins on the leaves. It's just a water stress symptom that's really driving a lot of that. So a lot of stuff does it. Well, anyway, red crown rot causes the same symptom. Here's an awesome picture from my collaborator at Illinois. And this is what red crown rot is going to look like on the base of that plant. It's actually little red spears. Eric,
Any idea how that got up in the ice days?
it's crazy. I don't know. It's so many things.
I mean, is that?
I don't want to blame it on birds, but
Anything that moves soil can move any of these soil-borne pathogens, so we carry it up on equipment or water movement or migratory birds have been blamed for SCN.
yeah. I just blame birds most of the time. No, I don't know. This one though, some of these things have spores that are going to move a long way in wind, right? Like southern rust. Some are like nematodes. They're not going to move very far, even if you're getting a dust storm. It maybe is moving dust some distance, but not a meaningful amount a long way. So we don't know, but I'll show you the map, and that gets map just causes even more questions. So here is a map where we're tracking this on the Crop Protection Network, red crown rot map. You can just Google that and it'll come up. Let me try and make this like full screen because this is interesting. So it was in Delaware like a while ago. Peanut states, this didn't really get reported. It wasn't ever on soybean in these areas until it showed up down here. Something about the weather in Louisiana and mixing with beans causes issues, but we have other new things down there too. But then suddenly it just started showing up here in the corner of Kentucky, and then the I-States just found it everywhere pretty quick. Each state kind of has their own person in charge of tracking this. So you can see that Indiana was finding it all along this area. And then the Ohio person, his office is probably right here. I'm guessing they've got it right here as well, though. They just hadn't went out and verified it. This Illinois is doing a great job of looking. Missouri is doing a really good job of looking too. So they've been looking out here close to us, but it really hasn't progressed that way. But that's not that far. So it could go pretty quick and we could see it. Richardson County, Nebraska seems to be where we find a lot of new stuff the first time. Like soybean cyst nematode in 1986. But it's not there yet. But I spent last fall down here with our extension educator in that region looking at fields because sudden death syndrome was horrible down there last fall. And we didn't find it, despite pulling a bunch of plants and looking at them. But then at the very end of the year, this happened. Wisconsin had one show up, and the very southwest corner of Minnesota, Rock County, had one show up. That's 75 miles from our border. So how did it get way up there? And they're looking pretty good. Iowa, they say they're looking really hard, but that guy's colorblind, so he might just not be able to see it. It's true. No, but I don't know. Like it's got to be in Iowa. If it's in that corner of Minnesota, it's got to be here too. So suddenly, I spent all last fall looking here thinking I'd see it. And now we're kind of trying to target up here a lot more. We've had some samples some reports of maybe having it, but I could never get any of those samples to actually verify it or see it or go to those fields. And then we've had another new thing happen, which is there's a couple companies that will test soil for like broad spectrum of organisms. And I don't even know how many they advertise, but they'll say we'll test for 300 different pathogens or something. A couple of those have reported that they have found it in Nebraska, some really close to Kearney actually. But I've been monitoring those fields and I've never seen it. But just because we have a pathogen here, which we haven't verified, doesn't mean that we have disease here. We need both the susceptible plant and the right weather conditions with that pathogen to actually cause it. So we could have, the South is full of disease issues that we're never going to have here, despite the pathogen being here, because the conditions aren't right and they're never going to be right. So just having those things doesn't mean it's an issue. But it was an issue here, so we're watching closely. and we're gonna monitor this, but if you think you have it, send it into the UNL Plant Pest Diagnostic Clinic. Or just call me and I'll come look at it. I'd love to see it and try and verify that. So we can figure out how to manage this when it inevitably does come here. It moved very quickly through these I
When did
states.
they start reporting it up there?
I don't know when the first report was.
Click on it and it'll tell you.
I don't know which county was first though. Usually, I mean, this was 2023. It's basically been just a couple years that it's moved. Now, this is not the first thing we've had move in. You know, cameras can talk about tar spot, right? It moved across. Who remembers sudden death syndrome moving across? I just assumed sudden death syndrome was always here, but actually it was 2004 when it really started to move through. So it's just become part of farming here.
What weather conditions would red crown rot be most apparent in?
Well, most apparent to see the symptoms or most would be, I mean, basically what we're gonna have. It's gonna get warm and dry later on. To cause it, it's just gonna be cool, wet soils early on. It's just like sudden death syndrome where it's getting in there, infecting, and then sitting in there for a long time. We see it when the plants get stressed, water stressed later on, or when they're starting to dry down. We can hide a lot of symptoms in Nebraska for several things just by having the irrigation capacity. When those beans look stressed, we're gonna put water on them.
A lot of that area of Illinois actually got pretty dry last summer.
Mm-hmm.
That it was probably, you know, seasonally wet there. I mean, it's always probably a little wetter there than it is most Nebraska sort of season. So that might have been part of it.
Yeah.
Was this that rapid transition to dry? It remained relatively dry for most of the rest of the year. There are parts of it, actually, North Platte had twice as much rain last summer as Champaign.
Yeah.
That gives you an indication how
That's
dry
cool.
it was in that part of the Midwest.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should do a better job of looking at weather patterns across all of our state yield loss estimates.
In 2024, there was a long stretch where the lower end, upper level winds were blowing east, southeast throughout the north central region. So I don't know if that had anything to do with stuff getting up to Minnesota.
It could.
It
That's
also
what's
was
tough. So,
very, very wet, and then when no rain for 2 months up there in 2024.
and we think of this one as being soil borne. It can make spores, but we're not really seeing those spores be able to get up and move at all. Kind of like white mold, it can make a lot of spores, they just don't move very far. But some of them could. It doesn't take much. If some get out, we've seen spores move from Africa to here. I don't know how viable they are, but remember the big Sahara dust storms moving stuff? Stuff's constantly blowing. We're also moving equipment. Animals are moving stuff around.
Well, the
Inevitably.
speculation for tar spot is like hurricanes from
Yeah.
Mexico.
Inevitably, if we have enough beans, more and more stuff's gonna keep moving in. Hopefully we'll solve some of those issues in time, but we're gonna keep getting new stuff. That's just how it is when you have millions of acres of one thing. Tamara?
So for those of us, and kind of trying to bring questions from the chat in, for those of us that are out in these soybean fields and we may start to see SDS or brown stem rot like foliar symptoms, we pull them. Do you think it's consistent that you'll always see those red structures if red crown rot's there?
Yeah.
Or if we have never had SDS, should we send it in for testing anyway?
Yeah, great question. That's a good point right now. You're not always gonna have those red structures. It might show up for a period and then it might go away. But the underlying factor here, which is the reason why we haven't seen imaging apps that tell us what kind of plant or what kind of weed something is, we haven't seen those translate into what kind of disease is this, is because every different variety or hybrid is going to show those disease symptoms a little bit different too. So it's always going to be different. It's why when I go to a field and I see these pathogens or suspected diseases, I can't tell what it is in the field. We really need to get things under a microscope. Why Tamara's sitting in front of a microscope right now, because you really can't tell a lot of these things apart without it. They're much too small. So I guess I'll finish on that note. Utilize the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic or any other private labs to actually verify what these things are. Because management is always going to be disease specific. So you've got to know what disease it is first. Okay, any questions? We'll let Tamara come switch over. I'm done. Thanks.
Well, I was gonna show my version of Lookout because I've got, or the risk tool, because I've got about over a dozen sites.
Kind of difficult with the Zoom and
Okay.
all that kind of stuff.
Oh, because.
You could join the Zoom
Oh,
and share screen.
Oh, okay, I'll do that.
So while she's doing that, I'm actually going to take a second. I'm going to bring up a handful of things. I hope some of you have seen this. This is a new thing we're doing with Scout Nebraska. We're offering bounties to identify different pests throughout the state and offering a cash reward for it. So one of the things that we want to do with Scout Nebraska, we show a lot of these maps that pick out where diseases are, at what time, when they start developing. But one of the big things is that we want that to be better than what a single educator or single specialist can do. I mean, we can only be in so many places. I'm technically probably only really supposed to cover parts of central Nebraska. But we end up covering a lot more area. One of the ways that we can do that now is with those map tools, you can submit your own photos, and we can identify specific diseases just based off those photos to let people in the counties and in the area know where those diseases are. So like with tar spot, anybody can take a picture and send it in to Tamara, essentially. She gives it an okay, and we can light up a county on that map. It's as simple as that. And so one of the ways that we want to start doing that is with the Scout Nebraska hashtag on Twitter, or Facebook are our main accounts. So I'm going to show you kind of, does everybody know what a hashtag does? Yes, no, maybe. So a hashtag is essentially a way to organize information on a social media platform. And so this is my Twitter, which I use pretty consistently with the Scout Nebraska hashtag. And so you can see this is a little bit of a teaser. We found southern rust here in the last, what, day? That's all right. You can say why. But so I reposted something from, or I posted something yesterday with this hashtag Scout Nebraska. If you click on that, it'll pull up all of our other posts about pest monitoring, pest management. And so this was a video that got shared to me from another educator that wanted it posted. This is actually an agronomist in Southwest Nebraska that's sharing off Scout Nebraska now. Some of the things that they're seeing out in the fields. He found some gray leaf spot earlier this week. We've got other educators. I mean, we've seen plenty of corn rootworm beetles pop up here in the last week. I don't know if that's something you guys have seen. But this is just one of the ways that we're trying to kind of combine everybody's efforts to share information throughout the state. And so if you're ever out in the field, you see something funky, you can use this, post a picture, use the hashtag. We'll probably respond to you. I at least repost like 90% of these posts. So, and do a lot of other things there. And so we also have the YouTube account, obviously, that I would recommend following.
My favorite post so far is the one where the grower put a picture of where pheasants had been.
Yeah.
Individual corn that had been planted.
Yep. Yep. And it had grabbed the seed, but not the actual corn plant. It just grabbed the, so, but yeah, so like this is a video that Samantha Daniel in Southwest Nebraska did. She's showing off how Western bean cutworm egg masses, when they're hatched, turn iridescent and kind of rainbow colored. So if you're out scouting, Western bean cutworm's pretty easy to tell, but if you can't find the actual caterpillars. So kind of different things like that. And then I was going to show one other thing, I think, but it's not coming to mind. And so, but yeah, we also have hats, if you can't tell. And so if you guys want a hat, I'm going to just throw them here on the back table if you guys want a hat or something like that. So otherwise, yeah, this is just kind of a way for us to share more information broadly across the state and then to get some feedback. So if you guys ever have any questions and you want to get like a quick answer, I do a pretty good job of checking this. I'm not going to be able to say I can answer every question just based off a photo, but things like tar spot are really easy to identify off a photo. If you take pictures of the front and back of the leaf, those kinds of things. So Did you join, were you able to join the Zoom or do I have to let you in?
I don't know, it's not gonna pick me up over there, is it? Cause if I turn my microphone on, I think we might get the screeching.
So this is what I'm not gonna have you mute yourself.
It was muted already.
So long as that, you should be good. You should be able to just show and then hopefully it picks you up. from the
So
computer.
maybe we can get a response from Chris. Can you hear me over on that other computer, Chris? Okay.
So-
It's a little delayed on the YouTube site, so, they're not, you guys online are not always seeing exactly what we're seeing on the screen, but it comes up eventually, so stay tuned.
We've have had a handful of people in the YouTube live stream, which is kind of cool. So. This is another version of that crop lookout tool.
I want to talk about that actually, because I think, there's an opportunity here where we can interact with you better out there. So I really appreciate Talon putting this meeting together. So thank you. And thanks for having Dylan and Eric and I to come out. For those of you, I tried to introduce myself to everybody, but I'm Tamara and I'm your extension corn pathologist statewide here in Nebraska. And of course, there's been a lot of diseases these last couple of years. And so diseases are getting a lot of attention. And part of it's just the trauma from what people lived through the last couple of years. And sometimes it's overreaction, but I think we keep talking about the biology and the favorable conditions of some of these diseases and the pathogens causing them, trying to help people feel a little more confident in when they might develop and what they might look like when they do, so they have a little more power. And we use tools like the crop protection networks, resources and tools like these maps to report things, to let people know what's in their area. And then they can use that information to make treatment decisions if needed. Often, people think that just because they've had something reported in their county or state means they automatically have to treat, and that's not true. It does mean we need to scout more diligently. And so right now, Talon mentioned we do have southern rust that's been confirmed in Nebraska. A couple samples came into the clinic yesterday, plus I picked up a couple of samples that on my trip down here from northern Nebraska. So
I think it's all the way to the left.
all the way to the left, okay. Maybe it's the second one to the left, or maybe, well, I'm just looking for the crop. I can open this fast. So if you're looking for the maps, oh, hey. It says crop protection network. I thought it would just, there we go. So if you're looking for how to find these maps, here's the quick way to it. Crop protection network, or just in Google, you can just type in Southern Rust map or whatever you're looking for. And the way this is laid out under resources is where the maps are. And I think Dylan mentioned in each of these states, we have different ones of our counterparts that are managing the maps. And just like you might have noticed, some states are more aggressive about reporting more quickly than others. And I err on that intentionally because I feel like if we have information that belongs to you and I want it out there. And so we're not necessarily implying management decisions there. And so you go to that Southern Rust option. I didn't talk you through that, and just scroll down on there. It's not immediately obvious, but that's where the map is. And so this is updated. It can be updated basically live. And so for the Nebraska one, let's drag it down. In Nebraska, I lit those 4 counties up this morning. And, for the first few of the year, we definitely want to have samples. And after that, once we've got some more widespread distribution, sometimes a really good picture can help us. And we work hard to go get these samples and to try to report that if that's going on, because, we've had a lot of false reports earlier this year, for instance, as everybody's looking so hard. And then we get some of those things that mimic it. Common rust, of course, is always there. And then things like Physoderma brown spot. You know, when we get those yellowing on the leaves, it causes a lot of panic, and people thought back, gosh, it must have been 4 weeks ago that they were seeing rust, and said, okay, no, that's different and not something you could even control if you wanted to spray. And so ID is still important, and that comes back to opportunities for you too. If you're seeing things that aren't being reported, we'd love to hear from you and what you're seeing in your area. We just can't cover the the real estate that you can while you're out there. And so I'm gonna go back to that other tool. So I tell you what, I'll just go there straight from here so you can find it. So back on this Crop Protection Network website under tools, um, Dylan talked about the crop risk tool. That's the forecasting models. And I'm really enjoying this right now. I'm going to jump over to my computer here in a minute and look at that. But the first thing I want to show you is the crop lookout. So see that crop lookout interactive map. It's a little bit misleading, the name of it. And so he had opened it up a minute ago and shown you that a lot of counties are painted yellow. And what that means is something's been reported for that county. And so for us in Nebraska, we're sharing data from the diagnostic clinic for samples that we're seeing, things that we're running across. Many of them are things that you've reported to us. And it doesn't have to be us reporting either now. So this is a really great new feature of this website. And so if you go to this website and let's say you're out here in Howard or Merritt County, say, well, I found some things too. And this isn't just one disease. So let's look at Saunders County. We've got a lot of different things that have been reported this year that I know I've uploaded to the map, you know, like bacterial leaf streak, northern corn leaf blight. It shows the dates that was reported too. So you can do that as well. You don't even have to go directly through us. And so I wanted to show that because what you can do is to go down here, let's see, and click submit report. And so under that, then click on your state, and then you pick the crop, and I'm going to pick corn here. And a lot of the most common diseases are already listed here. So just pick what you think you're looking at. And this can be a quick way to get some response back about what you're seeing. So right now, southern rust is kind of the hot topic, but up here, Physoderma brown spot, see all that yellow on the leaf blade? That can be concerning because we often see more yellowing around pustules of southern rust. And so a lot of people saw that earlier in the season. But if they submitted a picture of it thinking it might be southern rust, you know, click on that. And there's only a couple of required things here. We're not necessarily requesting exact location details. You can even list that as being anonymous. Click on state, county, and it can be as simple as that, but you've also got a chance to add in the pictures, up to 2 pictures. And we beg you, for disease stuff, it helps us to have at least one of them as a close-up and in focus. So we can see some borders of the lesions, maybe some specific colors. If it's tar spot, I'd ask for a front and back if you're looking at maybe identifying tar spot or one of these others. And the corn ones come to me. I don't know if you've been getting soybean ones come through you already, so we know that's working. And so if I look at it and go, oh yeah, that's what that is, boom, I can click it and it's automatically going to light up that county. Okay. And you have options for maintaining anonymity. It might be that we can see who you are, and we might ask, hey, you know, I can't tell for sure based on this picture. Can you send me another picture or a couple different pictures? Or even request a sample. Say, hey, can we get that run through the clinic? Part of it is for ID, but sometimes we're actually looking to collect from different parts of the state. There's analyses we can do to try to look at genetics or some other things and even put it in a Nebraska collection for use later for research projects. We have a few different self-serving reasons that we can do to kind of support our research and extension programs. So this is really easy, honestly. And so give it a shot. Let us know feedback. We can always run that up the chain if you're having any trouble with it or have suggestions on how we can make it easier. Honestly, I wish it would hold 4 pictures. Sometimes I want to see the more is often better. So that's one thing I wanted to show you is that crop lookout tool. And so I'll leave that one alone here. The let's see. Yeah, we could do that. I might have to plug in because
No, you can just stay there. I think we'll be all right.
plug in out. We're gonna lose mine pretty quick.
Okay, here.
The Dell type.
Is that the same plug-in there? Probably.
It looks like. Oh, you're not just gonna plug me into your.
I think we're out of slots. So gonna stop sharing there.
Share these plugs. As long as. Okay, is that better? You should be able to hear me better. And so I'm just showing you where I've got a lot of different locations marked. Now, looking at the map, and you'll notice on the right-hand side, I've got tar spots selected. And I wish this model also allowed us to add in the impact of irrigation. That's important to us. And a lot of that we know because of the work Talon has done on his master's thesis. And now we're continuing that with coal as we're following and chasing tar spot as it moves further west in the state. And so maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's worth sharing with this group too, and showing you where we're at with the tar spot map first before I get into, look at that. Hey, let's open another tab. It's just quicker. And your computer can totally handle it, right? So when you go on this page again, let's go to maps or resources and then maps and then tar spot. I dislike that the things I work with are alphabetized and toward the end of the alphabet. So everything's always at the bottom. And so when you start looking at this map, you're going to notice there's 2 colors, and the color differences between the maps is a little bit confusing. But when you're looking at this, notice there's gray and gold. On the tar spot map, gray is just showing you
where tar spot's been confirmed historically in the past. That's important because this fungus overwinters very well once it gets to a location. And that means when conditions are favorable, you're going to keep seeing it again and again. And so the gold counties are showing you where there's been active disease confirmed during the current growing season. Now, counties that are still gray instead of gold, that's just because we haven't had a sample or a good picture shown. And so I can guarantee there's probably tar spots somewhere in each of all of those counties. And so you'll notice how far west we've gone. This is about the border as far as we know it, Custer County, Dawson County, and up here into Brown County.
I will say, I feel like I'm about 80% certain that it's probably in Lincoln County.
Yeah.
Because I found it in Gothenburg,
So,
2 miles, but.
so we're waiting on you to find it, Talon, and so we
That's
can
not my
update.
county.
That's not your county. Well, we know how those things work. So when someone does find it, we might get a sample, a really good picture. I don't doubt at all that it's probably progressed, but it's at such low incidence, really hard to find right now. So that's where we've confirmed tar spot to date. And again, you'll notice we're being a little more aggressive here about showing what we're finding every year than maybe some of the other states. And so I'm going to minimize that.
And so one of the things with tar spot that I guess I'll just make some like current kind of update.
Yeah.
I was walking through a field in, well, I guess just southeast of Kearney here. And it actually had, I'm not going to say like significant levels of tar spot already, but it was a much larger amount that I've seen this time of year in this area than in years previous. Doing some on-farm research out there, and I mean, it was up to the ear leaf already. Tar spot is one of those that it survives in the residue, so it starts at the bottom of the plant, kind of like gray leaf spot, and works its way up. But one of the things I was seeing multiple lesions on just about each leaf up to the ear leaf, which is usually kind of a sign that you're going to have much more reproduction throughout the year. And so that grower had made an application already of a fungicide, which I think was probably, for that field at least, probably a good choice. Once you start seeing those polycyclic diseases like southern rust, like tar spot, more lesions you have out there, the more reproduction, the more spores, the faster that disease is gonna kind of explode in your field and get to higher levels. So when we're only seeing a handful of lesions, it's not a big deal. It's just a couple of spores that are going to be both in years like last year with southern rust, where you have so many pustules that just continue to reproduce. You get to those levels of like 50% where your plant shuts down, essentially just dies. And that'll happen with tar spot too, where you get some premature senescence under severe levels of disease. So thinking about weather, we all probably drove through a little bit of fog this morning. Fog's big with tar spot. I mean, our temperatures are maybe a little bit lower, cooler mornings maybe, which is good for tar spot. Like we maybe had mentioned earlier, that 75, below 75, 60 to 72, I think is what they say is the optimal. Usually that's going to be your overnight temperatures. But if you irrigate right before, like at dusk, or you irrigate right at dawn, that prolongs that period of optimal conditions and provides that leaf wetness. If you irrigate right before the sun sets, which obviously you can't always control, that water is not going anywhere until essentially sunrise or later the next day. So that's just something to keep in mind.
But even during the daytime, some of Talon's work showed that we saw up to a 9-degree temperature decrease in the daytime under irrigation. And that could firmly push you into that optimal range for quicker.
So my research
infection.
showed essentially over an 8-hour period after that irrigation starts, the average decrease was over 2 degrees Fahrenheit and lowered it right into that level of 72. And then when looking at leaf wetness, we had periods of leaf wetness that were greater than 24 hours. Depending on when that timing hits and then current conditions of either like the next day, your canopy can stay wet a whole day. If you get nice, cool temperatures, dew, all those kinds of things can contribute to long periods of leaf wetness. And so Relative humidity was the exact same thing. It increased relative humidity by like almost like 9% on average over an 8-hour period. I have 8 hours because that's kind of the infection. It needs that condition level that it needs over a course of 8 hours. So
I was just wondering, I forgot to pass around the leaves.
we've got some tar spot here. If anybody
Well,
wants to.
that one's southern rust
This one's southern
on
rust.
your left
Okay.
hand.
Can I
That's
grab
the
this
one that just came from Valley County yesterday. There's a little southern rust on those others from Greeley County. So if you want to pass that around and I can keep going here. I was just gonna show you on the map. So, we've got tar spot here, but I don't have the option right now to check whether it's irrigated or not. Just know that these maps can't build that in because they don't know if you can't check it there. But right now, all these green locations that I have highlighted are at low risk for tar spot, except for the one way up at Rapid City in western South Dakota. Well, the map also doesn't know where the disease has progressed, where the pathogen has moved out west. And so it doesn't know it's not in Ogallala yet, as far as we know, unless you come back and show us something here in the next few days. There you go. Don't say that too loud, Cole. But I want to show you on the map, on the right side on these charts, because Richardson County, that far southeast corner, you're looking at really low risk. It's just too hot. But when you look further out and you look back of, just as little as a couple weeks ago, we were at high risk in a lot of these areas. Ewing is on here because that's my closest town up north.
So that last week, I was actually out on vacation, but I remember it because we were out at the lake. And for like 2 whole days while we were supposed to be out on the boat, we essentially sat in our cabin because it was like 70 degrees all day with fog in the morning. And it was just not like lake weather. But
And we're still getting a lot of
And-
fog here and up north and elsewhere. So, just for comparison, check it out, North Platte at what? So that's, there's other things we should consider like the white mold, but this is just showing you how important temperature is in addition to that moisture. And so different parts of the state, we don't have it yet, but out here in the Panhandle, it's been favorable temperature wise for weeks now. So when we combine that with the effects we know from irrigation, I have less doubt now about whether tar spot is going to survive out there. So we'll have to wait and see, but I'm feeling more and more.
The thing that Eric pointed out to us earlier this week was that we've actually had more anomalies of winds coming from the east going west, right?
Yeah.
So
Especially lower, especially you get a couple thousand feet up in the atmosphere, we definitely at times are getting more winds from the east.
So those winds maybe pushing some of those spores that are already out there, all that kind of stuff, make for a pretty decent potential for disease to start developing or to potentially develop here in farther western Nebraska here this.
And the one thing, if you get a little past Fort Platte, I mean, it's fundamentally a lot harder to get high humidity out there reasons. So that probably wouldn't favor tar spot, but the temperatures overnight will drop off. So they routinely will drop. Even if it's 100 degrees, it usually drops at least the 60s.
And that's why I really think tar spot does have a shot out further west under irrigation.
Well, that's the only way you can get it.
Well, right, I'm not saying not irrigate, I'm just saying, don't let your guard down in some of those western locations, when it does get out that way. For comparison, you switch up here, look what happens when I go to gray leaf spot, a fungus with very different requirements. And boom, all of those locations turn high risk all the way across the state. And when you scroll down through here, you can kind of get a snapshot of what the last couple of weeks look like. So gray leaf spot, if it's out there, is going to come on stronger, but the gray leaf spot fungus needs humidity much more and wet periods for a much longer period of time than most of the rest of the fungi, especially tar spot. And so Panhandle out here, you've got some high risk periods, but not nearly like the rest of the state. Now, gray leaf spot's not important out there. I'm just pointing out because tar spot does not need much as much moisture as what we think. It's mainly the temperature. Okay, and so that hopefully will help kind of people, and this is a great tool. So check it out. If you get stuck on it, you can waste a lot of time looking at these models in different parts of the country too. Marcus.
So when it gets too hot, like
Mhm.
burn as much.
It just slows it down, unfortunately. So we got a question about the impact of the heat that we're about to have. It won't kill it by any means. And in fact, if you look at what's happened in some of the I states, especially Indiana, where they're watching very closely. Darcy Talenko, who has really been the queen of tar spot research over that way, she'll tell you when we start hitting 95, it didn't slow it down that much at all in the most recent years. Once they've built up a lot of fungus and inoculum, that if they had early disease, much like we have in the eastern parts of Nebraska this year, that's become normal for them and will probably be normal for us as we move forward. And it slows it down, but she said not all that much.
Oh,
Tar spot was first reported in Indiana and Illinois in 2015. So, just over 10 years, about a decade now. And in Nebraska, we just confirmed it starting in the fall of 21. So really in 22 and since. So this is still a newer problem for us. And we have a lot to learn about how it's going to react in the different environments as it moves further west. And that's why I'm grateful to the Nebraska Corn Board for supporting Talon's research and now Cole's research as we're following it west. And so if there's people, listening and further west, we'd love to work with you and get some of these weather stations positioned and move with it further west into these areas. So, that really kind of concludes what I wanted to say, but I want to give you a chance to ask questions and tell me, some of the observations you've got. Talon, you talked about severity on the leaf. We didn't talk about that. Many of you have probably already seen some of the data that we contribute to data that go into the crop protection network, but the tar spot data, honestly, the most is coming out of Indiana and some of the Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois. And on some of those, hey, let's open a new tab. And so some of those data are showing us that spraying, if you spray before the leaf gets more than 5% on it, then that's critical. If we get more than 5% on the leaf, we just can't get ahead of it then. And so you may ask, well, what does 5% look like? And I want to show you very quickly another tool on the Crop Protection Network that we use a lot for training. And so you can go on here to show and kind of train your eye on what you're looking for. So I go to Scout Corn here, and on that sample that came around, you saw a fisheye lesion around tar spot. That's not that common. Ours look more like just the black stroma. I don't know why that screen's cutting up, but
I don't think it likes your adapter.
it must not like my adapter. It's plugged in good, but in any case, you can use this severity estimation tool. Now that's a lot. That's 20%. But what if I showed you 4%? Does that surprise you when I say that's only 4%? Our tendency is to overestimate what we see, but you can use this tool to kind of train your eye before you get out there. And if that's what you're seeing on the ear leaf and you're irrigating a lot or you have favorable weather coming, I would have wanted to spray that day or sooner.
And that's kind of why I mentioned you need multiple leaves on a leaf. Like visibly, like you don't hardly have to look for the disease at all to really need that application. Because tar spot at 4%, you'll see. Walking through a field, that's not hard. And it'll be at higher levels under the ear leaf. So you can find it maybe at 10% on the bottom, can't be. But as it moves up, it's going to go less as it has less time to develop. The one thing is, as you get farther out west, as it's moving into those counties, you may look at the top of the canopy because that's when you're going to have kind of like those spore showers or things like that, pushing those spores into the field, where you're going to see more of a top-down appearance, where it's going to start in the top of the canopy and move down. But if it's been in your county and you know it's been in that field, you're gonna see it go from bottom up. Just as it spreads, so.
Marcus?
How about, like, tar spot, you guys started seeing it, or at least lighting the map up, like, late June, early, or mid-June?
Yeah.
late June, right?
Yeah, when we were having that cool spell
Yeah,
especially.
So what would your recommendation be then? Like, are you just gonna wait until it gets a little more severe, or kind of wait
Yeah.
until the
So-
weather?
Looking back at that data set from Purdue, and it's a multi-year data set, that's when they were seeing it too. But so they had a timing trial and they had treatments that they did start as early as V6 to V8, 9 to 12, and some of those earlier ones all throughout the season, and eventually a dual application of an early one followed by a VT, tasseling one. And they had their best disease control in those trials between the VT and R3. So, tasseling up through the milk stage. And occasionally when we have a lot of tar spots, sometimes early into doe. That was consistent with the southern rust research too, to protect those early reproductive stages. So they got their best ROI and their best disease control then, even when they saw it. But in their, they're showing really low levels, in those 5-leaf plants, those 6-leaf plants, they were getting tar spot. And keep in mind, if we spray those, you're gonna lose most of those leaves below the 6th leaf anyway, and they're gonna fall off. But, so the fungicide's only protecting what it's landing on, it won't carry through and give you protection for the new leaves coming out. And so when they treated it, the VT stages and later, they did the best job, but they acknowledged during a really heavy outbreak, if you're getting a lot of disease up the plant before tasseling, it might behoove us, but I don't think most of us are in that situation now. But the scouting and being out in the field often.
I got a lot of questions about, most of your growers are probably have already applied at tassel. That is very common to just have a tassel application. I would be interested to see if we moved off tassel a little bit later in the season, because here in central Nebraska, I don't think we see much disease until it hits those reproductive stages. And so when that plant switches from vegetative to reproductive stages, there's a big immune response change. It stops putting so much energy into a lot of those immune responses to fill grain, all those kinds of things. And so we don't have a lot of disease before tassel, really, that I've seen.
Not yet,
In central Nebraska.
not yet.
I would argue maybe in like Richardson County, they probably do, but,
And they've had the disease 4 more
So-
years. It took 3 years before they had enough in the I-states that they started to spray
and
it.
I think this is the 3rd year for Buffalo County or Hall County. No, this is the 2nd year, I think.
So it's an evolving situation still, and we want to keep hearing from you and what you're observing out there, and we'll keep chasing it with you further west and doing these fungicide trials. So anybody else, as we wrap up, I know we're right at almost noon, so
Assuming that they're gonna bring lunch in here.
I don't know.
Can't say I've ever really.
Set up next door, but I don't know if that's for this group or the.
So, we do.
that way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a cross stitch
Yeah,
retreat. We
they're-
could go
they're-
hang out with them.
They're busy this, for sure, so.
Thank you all so very much for coming
Okay.
and for joining us online. Thank you for supporting the program. I can let you guys wrap it up. Talon and Dylan are the hosts and are the masterminds behind Scout Nebraska. So I've appreciated getting to tag along with them.
The one thing I just point out is that we used to have that bounty. So if you find an easy way to potentially win $100.
That's
There
right.
you go. So,
And your bounty is white mold right now.
yeah, and so we'll be announcing a new one. Are we announcing a new one on Friday?
Next Friday. Yeah,
So-
today's Friday.
So then you have
Yeah.
2 bounty opportunities.
Yeah.
They can find white mold or
We're looking to find white mold here somewhere
Next
in the next week. So next Friday, I think we'll be announcing a potential winner to get some responses back. We have not
I've seen it. I've seen, the mushrooms too, but I haven't seen the symptoms develop like they have, so. We'll see. It sounds like a lot of other people aren't. Maybe we'll leave that one open if we don't have any.
Yeah.
So you could have multiple bounties open at once then.
Till they close
Exciting.
that, I
Yeah.
guess.
Every Friday at 11 a.m. we go live from somewhere in the state. Sometimes it's Dylan, sometimes it's me, sometimes a lot of the questions we got today were from Chris. Chris did one. I would like, so right now, the Wix team doesn't have like a consistent like seminar or something like that. So I'm hoping that as we get through the season, we'll keep going, and then at the end of the season, we'll kind of keep it going with short kind of talks from specialists about their research. One of the things that we're really trying to highlight with kind of this program also is doing on-farm research stuff. And so I'm hoping to go kind of walk through some of our on-farm research plots to show you guys the difference between treatments and that kind of thing. But I'm really hoping it doesn't stop here just at the end of the season. I'd like to keep it going for as long as possible, and we'll definitely, I mean, we'll be probably doing like programs. I honestly think this worked well. I don't know if it bothered you guys being online or anything like that, but
And if you go onto YouTube and search for Scout Nebraska, you can just subscribe and it'll probably notify you when we do go live,
Yeah.
so.
Yep.
Would appreciate it, yeah. All right, well, thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
you.